Hello and welcome to another live hangout. It is all happening here. We've had technical difficulties to boot. We've got it's all happening. This is what happens when we go live. It is so good to be back with you after a couple of weeks holiday. Can I tell you, I have just had the most amazing family holiday. It was. I might be able to show some photos and share some footage with you in coming weeks, but it was just outstanding. I'm feeling refreshed and but really missed hanging out with you all over the last couple of weeks, and so so good to be back. And we are going to kick off what will kind of be our run to the end of the year. Now we're going to kick off with a guest today. Marci Rosenberg is joining us. We are really privileged to have her. I will introduce you to Marci in just a moment. Before we do, just a couple of little housekeeping things. Not this week, but next week, I was hoping to get it up early, but as you know, every month at the moment we upload a new pre-recorded instructional video. The next one is on voice registration. It's the animation and everything is almost fully finished. I'd hope to have it ready for you on Wednesday. I don't think I'm going to get it ready by then. I think it's going to go live next Wednesday. Keep an eye out for it though. You never know. I might pull a rabbit out of a hat and get it up to you this week. I'll keep you in check about that. Also, here's a little bit of exciting news. I don't think we've ticked over it just yet, but we are about to click over, as a community, 100,000 subscribers. That even sounds big to say. I can remember when Voice Essentials YouTube channel was less than 1,000 subscribers. It feels like it was only just yesterday. But in fact, we are about to. In fact, if I don't do it this afternoon, it will click over tonight while I'm asleep into the 100,000 subscribers. This is in such a big part due to you and your participation, your belief in what we're doing here. As you know, here at Voice Essentials, this is the YouTube channel where everybody sings. Everyone has a voice, and your voice deserves to be heard. And I'm thrilled, I'm humbled at the prospect of getting 100,000 subscribers, which is just, even my 15-year-old son is impressed. He's telling all his mates that his dad's about to get a silver play button, which is what happens when you get 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if I can impress my 15-year-old son, I think I'm doing okay. And it's in no small part to your contribution to what we're doing here. So thank you. And you know, I think I'll be able to, I'm expecting that it will take a couple of months before YouTube, you know, send out the silver play button. Rest assured, you will be the first to see it right here on one of our live hangouts when it does arrive. And I'm looking forward to showing it to you so that we can all celebrate it, because it really has been a combined effort. I think that's enough housekeeping for now. I really want to spend some good time with our special guest today. So why don't we get straight to that, and I'll introduce you to Marci Rosenberg right after this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
Hello, Marci. Oh, we had so many crazy technical issues going on just then. We've been scrambling, haven't we, to make sure this happens.
Yes, and I changed locations.
You have changed locations?
Yes.
But
so you might see a couple of dogs walking behind me.
That's okay. My 2 dogs might find their way in as well as my cat. And can I just say to everyone, if for some bizarre reason the whole thing drops out today, unfortunately, that'll be run for the course because we've been having issues. I'm hoping that won't be the case because I've been so looking forward to hanging out with you, Marci. And for those people who don't know who you are, of course, people will have heard me talk about you at great length because this is the first edition of The Vocal Athlete, which you authored or co-authored with Wendy Leborgne, who was on our show only a few months back. But of course, what's really exciting is we now have the second edition, and I am a big fan and regularly refer to this book in my videos here on the channel. So people who watch the channel regularly will be no stranger to these two exceptional books, and there is actually an affiliate link in the description section below. Marci, fill in some of the blanks for us. Who are you, and how did you come to write what is just the most amazing text?
Well, thank you for such a lovely intro. So I am a speech language pathologist who also has a background in vocal arts. So my first undergraduate degree was actually in classical voice performance, though as a child, my big claim to fame was I did quite a bit of musical theater as a kid. I was one of those kid actors and pretty much trashed my voice doing an 8-week run of Annie when I was about 11. And so I had always done musical theater performing and then went a classical route. So I got an undergraduate in voice performance, but really was so interested in the voice science aspect of things and sort of the biomechanics. And though I didn't really understand what any of that was, I would go to my teachers with very specific technical questions, and they really didn't quite know what to do with me. And I finally had one teacher, Tom Hauser, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who was actually he was sort of a singing voice specialist. So he specialized in helping singers that were a little technically gotten off track. And he finally said to me, "What are you going to do when you graduate from Peabody Conservatory?" And I said, I don't know, because I don't want to get a graduate degree in opera. I'm not particularly passionate about doing that at a graduate level. And he said, "You need to go become a speech language pathologist, and you need to work with injured voices, because I think that that's something that you're clearly very interested in." And I thought, okay, that's what I think I'll do. And so I actually then went and got my speech pathology undergraduate, and then did some research at the National Institutes of Health for a year in their voice lab, and then went on to graduate school to become a speech language pathologist, and was hired at the University of Michigan right out of grad school because of my dual background. And I have been taking care of injured voices and rehabilitating singers and teachers and actors and lawyers for the past 18 years at University of Michigan. And I also have a small private voice consulting studio, and once in a while perform. So
wow.
that's in a nutshell.
And you're a mum, and you're a wife, and you're
right,
and all of the above. There's a lot in that, isn't there? And I think certainly here in Australia, and I'm almost certain this is the case in the US, speech pathology is such a wide field, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And in fact, speech pathologists who specialize in voice, it's a very niche subject.
That's right.
And it's so important to have ones like yourself who singers can go to receive very specific care as opposed to just generalized speech pathology. Yeah. There's so many things I want to talk to you about today because there's so much that you have some expertise in, but one area I want to kick off in. Firstly, let's talk about. So we've got edition 1, which I have read cover to cover, and just consumed and loved it and what have you. I ordered the second edition, but I must admit I'm yet to read it. As you might well expect, there's quite a few books on my shelf that are in the line. What are the major for those who have looked at first edition? What are the major differences between the two editions besides the general updates?
So expanded. So the motor learning chapter is expanded. The exercise physiology chapter has been expanded a little bit. I think the phonotrauma chapter was expanded. Added another second anesthesiologist into the what every singer needs to know about undergoing anesthesia. And Dr. Schechtman is actually the anesthesiologist that is specific to our otolaryngology department.
Fantastic.
So he is well versed in sort of the voice sort of component. So I had him add and expand to that. In addition to that, we have 2 entirely new chapters. So Dr. Robbie Kupfer is one of 3 phenomenal laryngologists that I have the honor and pleasure of working with at Michigan Medicine at the Vocal Health Center. And she has done a chapter for us on common vocal pathologies found in the vocal athlete. So that's going to be a wonderful resource for people to just kind of have an understanding of an overview of what we tend to see in the clinic and what the management strategies are for those kinds of patients. And then we have another chapter on perception, aesthetics, and registration that we have also added to the book. Then the workbook, there's a workbook also that comes with the textbook, and that workbook has probably 20 to 25 entirely new exercises in it as well, the companion workbook.
Wow. So. I can only think that it's been a labor of love, because it is so, and I said to you in the pre-show chat that it really is so accessible as a textbook. And I direct a lot of my students who are just starting to be interested in developing, I guess, a deeper level of understanding about voice from a technical standpoint. I direct a lot of people to this text because it is so highly accessible to a newbie, and yet I'm really cognizant of actually how challenging that is to make what can be very technical, very complex issues easy to understand. For example, I'm really now very keen to read Wendy's chapter on voice registration, because case in point, is there a more difficult subject to tackle in voice? I don't know. So I mean, it's just such a credit to you. How long ago did you start writing the first edition?
That's a good question. Wendy and I met at a conference that she was I think in charge of helping to put together, the Ohio Voice Association conference. That had to have been in 2008, maybe.
Wow.
And we sort of started talking about collaborating. And then in 2010, along with another speech pathologist, we sort of co-created a conference in Ann Arbor. And so we got to know each other. And then we started talking about writing a book that we would have wished that we had had. And so we kind of had early discussions, then just sort of slowly started to evolve. And then we just kind of just did it. And we're a good team because we have different, we both bring different sort of strengths to the process. Yeah. and we balance each other nicely. So, it's great when you find somebody that you work really well with. And the goal was to write, it is written to be a textbook. So it is very technical, but whenever I'm teaching or lecturing or writing, I always say to myself, I need to write this or create this lecture so that I could actually understand it. So that is the goal when writing. It's not to try to be overly complex and overly complicated, but to really try to keep it very straightforward and accessible, as you said, because I think there's enough complication with voice and the voice pedagogy field. And I think that sometimes people try to make it even more complicated than it already is. And so accessibility was definitely one of the primary goals. So I'm glad to know that you feel that it's approachable.
Well, if we could stand on the bow of a USS destroyer, we would hang a sign that says "Mission accomplished."
Thank you.
It really is fantastic, and so thank you. You have written a textbook that I think does achieve the goal of setting out a piece of work that many, not just young singing teachers, because I came to it well into my career as a singing teacher. It is definitely, I think you've achieved your goal of setting out to have a book that you would have wanted when you were starting out, and so not that you need my recognition. I just think it's fantastic.
Well,
okay.
Thank you.
Let's talk to one of your area. You mentioned there that Wendy has her strengths or bent, and you have yours, and I believe one of your bents is exercise physiology and the area of motor learning. Tell us a little bit more about that, because this is an area of passion for me also, and I'm just so keen to hear you talk about the subject.
So I think it probably goes back to when I was a frustrated learner of voice, a voice student, and I've had many voice teachers, and many of them have been very excellent, and then some of them haven't been as great. But I always found that I was frustrated with being bombarded with only imagery, or smelling the rose, and just sort of all of that kind of stuff. I really wanted something a little bit more concrete. And I would even go to my lessons, and I remember with one of my voice teachers, I would say to him, how come on this vowel, on this note, when I'm in this kind of a voice, do I hear like a crackling noise, but I don't hear it on that vowel? I mean, so I was I wanted to know the specifics. I wasn't satisfied with that very indirect approach, though I do think that there can be a role for that for some students. I wanted more. And when I went into speech pathology and started learning a little bit more about the biomechanics of voice, I started to have a couple of those aha sort of moments, and then finally finding a teacher, and Tom Hauser was probably that first teacher who was really what I would call a functionally based teacher. I thought, yes, this is what I am looking for as a voice student. And he identified that I was really very sort of jazzed by his approach, which I think, probably we're going back maybe 25 years now, maybe was not quite so typical at the time. And he's the one that sort of led me towards speech pathology.
Okay.
So I think, and then our field, the field of speech pathology in the last, maybe 15 years, 10 to 15 years, there's been more research done in that area. Voice is a very hard area to research for a whole lot of reasons. And there's only so much you can apply something that's done on a rat model to a human larynx. So, we have to be careful not to make huge leaps and assumptions, but I think we're moving in the right direction, and there are so many wonderful clinicians and researchers that are really adding to the field and just giving us more and more information to use and apply to our pedagogical approaches.
Yeah, and how when we talk about exercise physiology, how much of what we are learning about voice in the area of research in this space, it bears out as being reflected back to us in the area of sports science? Is there a level of connectivity that we're starting to see there?
I mean, I think so. It's interesting. So Mary Sandage is a PhD speech pathologist at Auburn, and she's really I would consider her to be just probably the absolute expert in all things exercise physiology as it pertains to voice.
And I think she co-authored a small chapter, didn't she, with, is it Matthew Hock in
yes,
Saddle
right,
Offs?
exactly.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so he's on the pedagogy end.
Yes.
And also has that interest in exercise physiology
Yeah.
and motor learning. And they actually did really a nice comprehensive kind of review of a lot of our seminal vocal pedagogy works, and found that there was a lot of attention to sort of skill training and acquisition, but not a whole lot on some of those other exercise physiology principles that we tend to think about. And so those principles that I'm talking about are the overload principle, the specificity, the reversibility principle. So those kinds of principles. So there wasn't a whole lot of attention to that, but there was to skill acquisition.
Yes.
So now I think what's happening is that we have an understanding that we have to actually overload a muscle a little bit when we're training, right? If I want to bicep curl 10 pounds and I only really am physiologically capable of doing 7, I cannot get to 10 pounds by just continuing to do more 7. Of the 7-pound weight. I actually have to push to 8 pounds so that I am creating these metabolic changes in the way that my muscle, sort of the bioenergetics of the muscle and how it gets fuel and how it uses fuel. Those things actually in the athletic physiology world can be trained. So, but it's not going to happen unless I actually tax that muscle. And so in the world of voice, we get a little nervous, right? Because when we think about overloading, then we immediately think about, straining. And so it's interesting when working, especially when you're working with a patient population. One of the things I teach my patients is there's a difference between train and strain.
Love it.
And
it's
not always easy to understand and tease out what those differences are.
Well, it's a fine line between strain and pain, isn't it?
Right, absolutely. And so overloading is different than overtraining.
Yeah.
And Debbie Filand, who's doing a lot of really nice work with voice fatigue, and she actually has a wonderful survey that a screening device called the EASE, the evaluation of the ability to sing easily. And, so she talks about that over training is actually under recovering. So we don't give ourselves enough time to actually recover.
And just so people know who Debbie Filand is a friend of mine. I sit on the board of the Australian Voice Association with Deb, and she's a really highly regarded speech pathologist here in Australia. It's lovely to hear you mention her, and she's a good friend.
Yeah, I mean, she's doing great work with voice fatigue, and we're, I use her EASE in my clinic, and we are, we actually screen all of the incoming musical theater freshmen, and for those of you who may or may not know, University of Michigan has probably one of the top and most rigorous musical theater programs in the country. And so we screen them all when they come in. They all get strobes. And we're actually doing a research study, my laryngology colleagues and myself, following them throughout their entire program.
Wow.
And we are also looking at how much they're complaining of fatigue, and I have them on a laryngeal fitness sort of protocol, and we scope them at interval times during their program to take a look at what the trends are for these pre-professional musical theater vocal athletes. And so, it's this idea of and specifically with musical theater singers, not only are they actual athletes because they're dancers, they're doing a lot of physical things while they're singing, but they're also doing 8 shows a week on a national tour. And they sometimes don't have that recovery time that they need.
Yeah.
So how do you prepare a singer to do something like that? So going back to some of those exercise physiology principles of that overloading, intensity and overload, specificity refers to actually training to the task that you are wanting to acquire the skill in.
Yeah.
So if I want to learn to belt, I have to sing in my chest voice, and I have to bring my chest voice up to a certain level, and I've got to get there.
Yeah.
So all of the head voice vocalises in the world, while would be wonderful to help with balance and registration and balance, and are very useful, are not targeting that specific skill.
Absolutely.
So that's the exercise physiology principle of specificity.
Yeah.
And then we have the reversibility principle, which is you use it or lose it.
Yes.
And so in Mary Sandage did some of the earlier writing was talked about exercise physiology literature of 2 weeks out of the gym takes about 4 weeks to get back to your baseline.
Yeah.
So we don't really know how that applies in the singing world.
I'm just having a quiet moment of excitement right now, and I'll tell you why. Firstly, I just need to let everyone know I've actually done a video on exercise physiology reviewing the chapter that Marci and I are talking about right now. So if you want to watch that and sort of have a little bit more detail about specificity and those sorts of things, I go through the 3 of them, the overload principle, etc., in a video that you can see on my channel. Where I'm getting a little bit of excitement is I actually, years ago, I did a video called the ×2 principle. And this is, and I say in the video, it's purely based out of anecdotal observation. And the anecdotal observation being that in the case of acute sickness, that for every day that you are acutely sick, you can generally expect it to take around about 2 days to return to baseline voice use. It's a rule of thumb. It's not an exact science, but it's really interesting to hear you mention that 2 days out of the gym equals, was it 2 weeks out of the gym equals 4 weeks return or something?
Yeah.
Is that how you said it?
And how many of us have experienced that?
Yeah, exactly.
In the gym? So, yeah, and I think it's the same, there is a detraining effect in terms of when you are training those voice production muscles, whichever there are many of them. Yeah. If you then stop doing that, they're going to downregulate. They're not going to be metabolizing. They're not going to be generating the fuel in the same way. They're not going to be as efficient. So I think that as a teacher, if you can think about voice training in a little bit of a more straightforward way like that, it's a little bit of a better roadmap to guide you as a teacher when you're working with students. Yeah. So this idea of teaching a student to think about their voice in an athletic way, thinking about, yes, we have to train, so we've got to have a little bit of that overload, but we need to make sure that we're not overtraining and that we're not under recovering. That's where I think people get lost. Yeah. I think that they get lost with the not leaving the body enough time to recover. Yes. So this concept of taking a vocal nap. Yeah. I don't know, you've probably heard that term before. What I tend to tell my singers is if you're doing, and this is certainly in a patient setting, if you're doing a gig that's an hour and a half, then give yourself a good 2 hours of a vocal recovery after that. What really gets the singers is not the actual singing that they're doing. It's the meet and greet that they have to do afterwards in the lobby.
It absolutely is.
the press stuff that they have to do the next morning or all day.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that does them in.
Yes, it is.
So, Kitty Verdolini and her colleagues did a fabulous study where they were looking at wound healing. And what they did was they divided groups, and they gave everybody a vocal loading test. These were not singers. They had them all read out loud very, very loudly so that they were fatigued.
Yeah.
And before they did that, they actually had done swabs where they were looking for specific biological markers that indicate whether or not wound healing where we are with wound healing in that phase with that overloading. And they divided them into groups. One group, they said, you guys be completely silent. One group, they said, you guys go back to your normal talking and just your normal life. And then one group, they did semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. And in this specific study, they were doing a resonant hum. Mm-hmm. And what they found was it was actually the semi-occluded vocal tract group, the group that did the hums, that had the most recovery. The complete total vocal rest group was in second place, and the group that went back to just the spontaneous talking was in even worse shape, I think, when they re-tested them and re-looked at them a day later or 48 hours later. Yeah. So that speaks to the concept of allowing the body to recover,
absolutely,
but the vocal cool down first, and then have the vocal nap.
Yes. And in fact, it's interesting to hear you talk about Kitty Verdolini, because I remember Kitty expressing early day interest, if you like, in this subject when she was here at the Australian Voice Association conference in Sydney in 2000. It was either 2005, 2004, 2006, somewhere around there. And she was starting to talk about the molecular structures and the impact of fatigue and those sorts of things. So it's interesting to hear that she's gone on to complete that area of interest, because
Well, and it comes from the physical therapy sort of literature and the orthopedic literature. If anybody's that's watching this has ever had a shoulder surgery or a knee surgery or something, who's knocking on that hospital door within the first 24 hours? It is the
physiotherapist.
And they are starting to do that gentle range of motion, because the idea behind that is that actually triggers a healing cascade.
Yeah.
And I think that that is an underappreciated thing in our world of the active singer. I think a lot of people have jumped on the let's do a vocal warm-up train.
Yes.
But are they doing a warm-up that's actually efficient?
Yes.
Is it a task-specific warm-up that's actually accomplishing a goal?
Yeah.
And then are they cooling down after?
Yeah.
So it's these kinds of principles that I think make so much sense, but yet a lot of us as teachers weren't trained that way.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it is a sort of area that you've got to go specifically about reading, don't you? As a singing teacher, you have to really go in pursuit of that information, because university degrees can't cover everything because there's too much to cover, and a lot of this information is new. One area that is also that I know is being researched, I'm interested to hear if you've heard any update on the outcomes, is the research into, and it may have even been Mary Sandage that was doing work in this area, about the quota ratios for voice use.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about the vocal dosing?
Yeah. Have you heard any more about that?
Yes, they did they were looking at classroom teachers, and they did essentially, they were, I think the long and short of it was that the voicing happens in 3-second kind of segments at a time, but thousands of them per day, right?
Yes.
But in terms of the moment of speaking, it's sort of like a 3-second kind of segment for classroom teachers.
Right.
And so if we have that information about what is it actually the duration of time that's being phonated per utteration or something along those lines, that can help inform how we're training and what we're training for. So when I now have that teacher in my clinic, and I do see many, many teachers, they make up a large portion of my caseload, then I might say, okay, I can design a training regimen that sort of takes into account that sort of what is needed, that distance per se, right? So if I'm running a marathon, I know I have to train up to my 26.2 miles. If we have more information about what are those specific doses. And so that was the first study that was really looking at that and starting to provide really useful information about how can we tailor our training and our rehabilitation towards what the actual need is.
Have they started to extrapolate that out into not only what vocal dosing we need to work up to, but then in keeping with that, what sort of level of vocal rest is required in response? Has there been any outcomes with that? I
don't think not in that paper. I think that was probably more along the lines of what Kitty Verdolini and her colleagues were doing in terms of what to do after the fact, sort of the oops, I've just engaged in a lot of voice use, now what should I do? But yeah, I mean, these are the studies that we need to continue to have and work towards, and it's difficult research to do. It's not easy to do it in a neat and tidy way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I often have conversations with friends and colleagues around, some of the early research that was done around, particularly contemporary voice. You'd have a study that says we took, 12 trained classical singers. Well, that is so. Can you get a more broad statement than that? I mean, trained by who? In what methodology? It's so, so it is such a difficult thing to specifically research the voice, and this is why, the going is slow, but it's still very exciting. It's.
Yes, it is. And then I'll go one further. The research that has been done on the more contemporary, so on belting, then you have to say to yourself, well, who's to say that it was actually belting? Who was rating it? What were they basing that on? When we looking at acoustic measures or outcomes, it's based on somebody's opinion that something was belting, but it's hard. It's difficult.
Was it healthy belting? Was it unhealthy belting? Was it belting in keeping with music theatre? Was it belting in keeping with pop? I mean, it's we could be here all day dissecting the hair.
And we know that two people, Wendy and I could both produce a similar sound, but doesn't mean we're biomechanically doing the same thing. We're not the same. We have a different horn. I mean, so it's not apples to apples always.
Is it ever in human voice? Is it ever apples to apples? I don't think we can't we? Anyway.
But that's why the voice is so interesting.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. That's why we're doing what we do. I've just looked over at the time, and I am not surprised to see that we are going to race the clock here. I do want to there's a few things here that we were going to talk about. I'm going to jump to, let's say a voice falls into, the way I frame it is I often refer to it as a voice falls into disrepair. So the injured voice. What is your approach, and what is your current research around the care of the injured voice?
So it has to be patient specific.
Yeah.
Obviously, it depends on the nature of the injury.
Yeah.
And, the same vocal injury can have a very different impact on one patient than it has on another patient. So it's really a very complex picture. It has to do with what is the actual organic pathology, how is it impacting that patient in terms of their quality of life, what is their history, what are their other comorbidities, other issues that are coming into play, and then it comes down to what are the things behaviorally that we have control over. So what are the things that we can actually manage and adjust in their life to reduce their vocal dose, shift things, so behavioral things. Some things we don't have control over. So a teacher has to go to work and teach their class and make their living.
Yeah.
But we can certainly modify the classroom, give them amplification. If it's a singer who's gigging, they can change the keys. They can make sure they have an in-the-ear monitor. They can switch up the order that they're doing the set so that there's variation in what they're doing with their vocal default setting, which is less fatiguing, those kinds of things.
Yep.
And then there's the actual exercise physiology stuff and the training stuff. And so then it becomes looking at what they need to do and how can we teach them to create the sounds that they want to be making in the most efficient way possible. And then there are all sorts of ways that you can do that, right? So, I am a big fan of the semi-occluded vocal tract exercising and using those as an entryway into some of the more complex vocal tasks. I don't ever have a preconceived idea of what I'm going to do with the patient until we start working. And then I absolutely modify right there on the spot. I invent exercises based on what is happening in front of me to help get them the balance that they need. Some very general guidelines that I would say I'm reasonably consistent with is that I do the exercise, the idea of reciprocal inhibition in that we have agonist and antagonist muscle pairs, right? So a bicep and a tricep, a ham and a quad. And in the voice, that's the thyroarytenoid and the cricothyroid muscle. Yep. So I do like to vary what I'm doing because when my thyroarytenoid is active, my cricothyroid is also active, but not as active as my TA muscle. When my cricothyroid is active, if I'm up in high soprano-y stuff, my thyroarytenoid's sort of kicking back and relaxing. So by kind of varying what you're doing and moving around the keyboard, not only are you giving the other muscle a little bit of a break, but you're also cross-training and you're training your mechanism to be a little bit more responsive so that you can flip from head voice into a chest, into a belt, which is what a musical theater singer has to be able to do. Yeah. So those are some general guidelines that I definitely is sort of the umbrella when I'm working. But in terms of the actual specific exercise and the vowel that I'm picking and what vocal tract shape I'm going for, it really depends on what is in front of me and what their goal is.
It's almost taking an approach, and I know that you would never call yourself this, but from a generalized sort of, it's almost an occupational therapy kind of response, isn't it? It's specifically, attending to the person's circumstance and how they have to then apply that in their real world, not some textbook real world.
Right. And I would say, and here's the mistake that I think a lot of us have made as teachers, and this is where the motor learning stuff comes into play as we segue into the next topic. Slower gets you there faster, 100% of the time with voice training. So you have got to, and singers, we don't like to be unstable with sounds that we're producing. We don't like to wiggle around. We don't like things to feel like we don't have control. But you have to be okay living in that gray area and allowing your body time to make those adjustments. You've got to go slow. And I think that we're so busy trying to be efficient that we're robbing ourselves of that true kind of that process of actually integrating the things that we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's where the motor learning principles come into play versus a quick fix.
Absolutely.
Do this.
Yeah.
And there's a difference between that, which in a coaching for a quick fix might be what's needed at that time. But if we're actually talking about learning long term and motor learning versus motor performance, you really have got to adhere to some of those principles.
It's quicker to give a man a fish, isn't it? But
That's right.
it's so much, it takes longer to teach a man how to fish and the art of fishing, but that person will then feed their family for a lifetime. It is so exactly the same for voice. And I'm not surprised. Of course, I've read the book, so I'm not surprised to hear you talking to these things, but equally it just, I'm smiling like a Cheshire cat, because this is the stuff that I really resonate with, and it is the slow road. It is the, dare I say, the high road, and it is the longer road, but equally, like you say, it gets you there quicker because you're actually getting in and reworking the muscle memory and teaching the voice to do things different.
Right.
And that's the key.
And I think one of the other key things that I do in terms of how do I apply these principles in my own private voice studios and also as a clinician is you have to have the student provide their own feedback before you tell them your opinion about what just happened. That is critical. We do way too much talking as teachers. And so when we do that, we are truly robbing the student of the actual learning process because we're doing all the work for them.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting to me how often when I say, one of the first things I do when a patient comes is I say, show me how you're practicing. Not tell me what you're practicing. Show me how you're practicing. And then I might say, or show me what is your standard vocalization routine? Why do you do that? What is your goal biomechanically with that? And very often they're not able to really answer that question. And it's just because, well, that's what they do. Or because it's in the Vakai book, or it's because that's what their teacher taught them. And so it's learning to actually do that critical thinking. I think as teachers, it is our job to teach our students how to be able to critically think about their own voice, because you don't go home with them.
No.
And you're not sitting on their shoulders saying, why are you doing that? What is the goal? And so teaching them to be able to do that, I think also helps them be their own teacher.
Yeah, it's empowering the student, isn't it, to be their own teacher.
Right.
And
but it's not as glamorous. It doesn't make you look as smart because you're not lecturing as much. And it's sometimes frustrating for the student because they just want you to tell them, was it right or was it wrong?
Yeah.
But it really is it gives you the better product. And at the end of the road, you have a more competent singer.
Absolutely.
Who knows how to critically think. So when things do go amok when they're on the road, they might have some tools where they might actually be able to undo. I had somebody that I worked with a few years ago that did a national tour of a very popular musical, and he was in ensemble, but often was covering things, and sometimes he had to be in one voice type for these three measures, and then in another voice type for these three measures, and it was really starting to become a problem for him, and he was resorting to some of his more traditional classical techniques and was warming up more and more and more. But what he was really doing was a very traditional low larynx kind of yawn sigh type of thing, which was actually the opposite of what he needed to be doing to achieve what he needed to be achieving in his job. But he didn't know that because that's not how he was trained.
Yeah.
And so when, now back out on the road, that singer will have some critical thinking skills to be able to say, okay, I need to actually not do this big low larynx because I'm actually not a tenor, but I'm singing in the tenor section, for this particular number. So really what I need to be doing is a more neutral to high larynx and allow that to go where it wants to go naturally type of thing. So that's just sort of one example of how we get locked in our old, the pedagogy that we were raised with.
Yeah.
And because we weren't taught to really think functionally and in biomechanical terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And which is why I feel very fortunate that through the training of ones like Adele Nisbet here in Australia, who ran sort of the first of the Australian pedagogy courses, taught us functionally. I come from that era of developing and understanding about the voice from a biomechanical point of view, and I'm now starting to add to that the understanding of the voice acoustically, and so there's a lot of power in the combination of those two understandings. We are going to have to wrap it up because we are out of time, and I do want to identify for everyone. Marci has been doing this at what is now 5 to 1, like as in 1 a.m. everyone, and so I am just so thankful that you have taken the time, and also that you stuck with me through our early technical challenges.
My pleasure.
We got there. You know what? We haven't had time to talk about frameworks for guiding pedagogical decision making. We haven't had a chance to look at practical semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, SOVTs. We haven't had a chance to do any of that. Maybe it would be a thrill to have you back, and maybe we'll be able to do that again sometime soon. Thank you so much for your time, and I have so enjoyed having you on, as I knew I would, and I'm really looking forward to sinking my teeth in. I will read this cover to cover again. I'm not going to sort of, what would we say? I'm not going to sort of take little bits. I'm going to read it cover to cover. Everyone, I would encourage you, if you don't already own a copy of The Vocal Athlete, buy the second edition. This is the book that is really going to give you access to a deeper understanding about how your voice works and functions, particularly for contemporary vocals, popular culture musics. So please take an opportunity to use the link, the affiliate link in the description section below. Also, I just want to let you know, I didn't put Marci's website in the description. I am going to do that later this afternoon. I've got a student who's about to walk through my door for a lesson, but late. Yes, it is late afternoon here in Australia, not early evening as it is in Michigan. But I'm going to do. I'll put Marci's, which is, just to let you all know now, www.marci-rosenberg.com. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Hey.
Marci-Rosenberg.
Dash. So, Marci, thank you.
My pleasure. Happy to come back.
You were a delight, and it's so good for us to have access to this kind of really, cutting edge understandings about, how the voice works and what it does. So, really appreciate your time. If you want to just give everyone a wave, I'm going to wrap the show up and see everyone off. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. Aren't we fortunate here at Voice Essentials to have so many high quality people join us for our shows and give of themselves so freely. If you've enjoyed today's video, make sure you leave a thumbs up. Share this video with your friends and family who are into singing, because as you have experienced, there is just so much in this. Grab yourself a copy of the book. It is outstanding. As you know, I haven't read the second edition, but I have read the first, and I cannot wait to get into the second. Woo! What a day. It has been so fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week, where we will do a Q&A, and I'll answer your questions. I know a number of you have been asking questions in the live chat. Thank you for joining in. It is always a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in the next Voice Essentials video. I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.